I'm John, the eldest of four siblings. Both my parents worked, but with so many siblings, we were pretty poor. I used to deliver newspapers to help out with the family's finances. I really wanted to go to high school, but given our financial situation, I couldn't bring myself to tell my parents, so I chose to work right after middle school. I moved out and started living on my own as soon as I graduated from middle school. Ideally, I would have preferred a job close to my parents' house, but the only place willing to hire someone with just a middle school diploma was quite far away. I had no choice but to leave home. Finding an apartment was also a challenge. The company didn't provide any dormitories or company housing. There were hardly any places willing to rent to a 15-year-old. The place I eventually found was a 50-year-old rundown apartment. The toilet and bathroom were communal. It was hot in the summer and cold in the winter. Looking back, I can't believe I lived there for 3 years. Being a middle school graduate, I worked for minimum wage, grinding away while my peers enjoyed school and hung out. If I took a day off, my pay would be docked. Plus, I was sending money back home, so I was always hustling. At first, being yelled at was a daily occurrence. I was in the construction business, so injuries were frequent. But I worked hard and made a real effort to learn my job well. Gradually, the folks at my company began to recognize my efforts. By the time I turned 18, although it wasn't a paycheck to boast about, I believe I was making significantly more than most of my peers. When I turned 18, I also got my driver's license and took out a loan to buy a used, inexpensive compact car. Around that time, I also started dating my first girlfriend. She was my age and worked at a convenience store near the job site. We started talking after a chance encounter during one of my lunch or dinner breaks. Her name was Alice. We shared a taste in music and had somewhat similar backgrounds. Right after graduating high school, she began living on her own and, like me, sent money back to her family. She'd always listen to my silly stories with a smile, and I looked forward to seeing her during my work breaks. When the project at that site wrapped up and I was transitioning to a new job site, I gathered the courage to confess my feelings to Alice. It was my first time confessing to someone, and given our educational backgrounds, her being a high school graduate and me a middle school dropout, I honestly wasn't too confident. However, I'd never felt this way about someone before and wanted to cherish her. I consulted with my senior colleagues at the company, and one of them advised,
"It's not about education, man. It's about how you feel."
He gave me the push I needed. Even so, I was anxious about her response and was prepared for rejection. However, she gave me a positive answer with her usual radiant smile. I couldn't help but strike a triumphant pose on the spot and hugged her tightly. My senior colleagues, who'd been quietly rooting for me, were overjoyed, and I invited Alice for our first date at a nearby cafe with one of them. My senior colleague treated us to the most expensive dessert, saying it was a
Celebration.
Soon after we started dating, Alice and I moved in together. My workplace was a bit far from the convenience store where she worked and from where she lived. This distance was one of the reasons I'd been hesitant to confess my feelings. However, on the day I did, she told me she was considering moving and changing jobs. Since I'd also been thinking about relocating, in the heat of the moment, I suggested we live together. To my surprise, she readily agreed. Having grown up in a large family, she found living alone a bit lonely. She later told me that she had thought about hinting at the idea of living together if I ever confessed. So when I brought it up first, it was like a dream come true for her. Luckily, an apartment near my workplace became available, and we signed the lease right away. Compared to my previous place, this one was relatively newer. However, its appearance and interior were a bit dated. I was concerned whether Alice, a young woman, would be okay with it. But Alice reassured me, saying,
"It reminds me of home and feels comforting. And if I could live with you, John, I'd be happy anywhere."
At that moment, I began to seriously consider marriage. Our life together began from there. Even on exhausting work days, coming home to my beloved Alice and a warm, delicious meal was the best. We'd chat until we drifted off to sleep. We continued to send money to our respective families, so while we lived frugally, those days were filled with happiness. 3 years flew by, and I started thinking about proposing to Alice. Money was still tight, so I planned to save a bit more before buying an engagement ring and popping the question. However, as if fate was playing tricks on me, the company I joined at 15 went bankrupt. Apparently, the business wasn't doing well, and suddenly, I found myself unemployed. Though Alice was working and we could get by, I didn't want to burden her, so I desperately searched for a new job. But it was tough finding a job with just a middle school diploma, and I got turned down multiple times. I attended countless interviews and finally secured a job at a construction company, similar to my previous work. They recognized my solid work history, but due to my educational background and in consideration of other employees, I had to start at a lower salary than before. Nevertheless, Alice was thrilled about my new job and made a celebratory feast for me. That gesture meant the world to me and intensified my desire to propose to her soon. From then on, I worked my tail off. Alice was tirelessly managing both her job and our household, and I wanted to lighten her load and truly become family as soon as possible. I began saving every penny, tucked away an engagement ring in my pocket, and took Alice to a fancy restaurant for her birthday. I hadn't told her where we were going, so when we arrived at the restaurant, she was genuinely surprised, saying,
I honestly thought we were going to our usual cafe.
She was a bit flustered and giddy. I escorted the pleasantly shocked Alice into the restaurant. The inside of the restaurant had a counter and a few tables, exuding an aura of luxury. It was apparent that there were wealthy elderly couples and individuals who looked like executives seated around. We might have stood out, but as soon as we entered, the staff greeted us with a polite bow and said,
Welcome. You have a reservation, right?
They led us to our table, and the other patrons didn't seem to be bothered by our presence. While you could order individual dishes at this place, I had, admittedly, a limited budget, so I opted for the least expensive course. Other customers seemed to be indulging without a care for the cost, and I felt a bit guilty for not offering Alice more. Nevertheless, she looked genuinely pleased. At one point, she told the chef, who was on the other side of the counter.
This is so delicious.
The chef replied,
Thank you, and happy birthday.
Alice looked at me, surprised. When I responded with a warm smile, she beamed back, clearly overjoyed. Yes, I had informed the restaurant over the phone that it was her birthday. Seeing her so happy made my day. The elderly couple sitting next to us overheard the exchange. The sophisticated-looking wife said,
Oh, is it your birthday? Congratulations.
Alice replied,
Oh, thank you so much. He brought me here to celebrate.
The woman responded,
What a wonderful boyfriend you have. Make sure you enjoy your special day.
Although a little embarrassed, it felt great to be blessed by complete strangers. As we enjoyed our delicious dinner, we reminisced about our past and how we met. Neither of us grew up with money, so dining out as a family was a rarity. Being able to go to a restaurant only became possible when we began earning for ourselves.
I've always dreamed of dining in a fancy restaurant. To think that wish would come true on my birthday. I really am so lucky.
Alice said, laughing with slightly teary eyes. Soon after, a young couple entered and took the seats next to ours. The boyfriend, who looked around my age, and the girlfriend, who seemed a bit younger, immediately caught my attention. As soon as they sat down, he said,
Chef, the usual. Only serve the most expensive dishes.
His attitude came off as arrogant, leaving a slightly off-putting impression. However, without paying much attention to them, we continued with our meal. Suddenly, the boyfriend blurted out,
Wait a minute. Is that you, John? It's gotta be.
I looked up, and to my surprise, it was George, a classmate from middle school. George was the son of a wealthy businessman, and he always looked down on me in school for coming from a humble background. He wasn't well-liked, but he always had a gang of followers around him, thanks to his money. Hey, long time no see, was all I managed to say, internally groaning at the unfortunate coincidence of running into him on such a day. I had hoped to end the conversation with just that, but George, with an almost childlike glee, kept pestering me. His girlfriend chuckled beside him. Alice, ever the diplomat, smiled patiently, engaging in the conversation without showing any sign of annoyance. She even frequently apologized, playing along with George's stories. As George looked over our table, he commented,
Really? Look at what you're eating. How poor can you get? Look at us and the other customers. This is how you dine at a high-end restaurant. Trying so hard, even though you're clearly out of your league. Aren't you embarrassed?
His words were sharp, filled with disdain. George's girlfriend chimed in, mockingly saying,
Poor girl, having to be with him.
Alice's face turned expressionless. Enough of this crap. In a moment of heated emotion, I couldn't help but shout at George, forgetting for a moment that we were in a posh restaurant. I didn't want to create a scene, especially not in front of other guests and, most importantly, not on Alice's special day. I felt we were the cause of disturbance and didn't want to ruin the evening any further for her or the other patrons. Whispering to Alice, I murmured, I'm sorry, let's leave. But as we were about to get up, the chef interjected.
I deeply apologize, but due to causing a disturbance to our other guests, I must ask you to leave.
I felt guilty, thinking he was referring to us. However, in the next breath, the chef clarified,
I was referring to the two of you.
nodding towards George and his girlfriend. George, visibly taken aback, retorted,
Excuse me, to regular patrons like us. How dare you speak to us in this manner? Don't you know how much business we bring to this place?
While I appreciate your patronage,
The chef continued, addressing George.
we reserve the right to serve whom we please. If you're unhappy with our service, please feel free not to return.
As George sat there, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment, the elderly couple who had been seated next to us spoke up.
It's her birthday today. You've completely ruined it for her. Do adults like you not understand basic etiquette in a dining establishment?
The woman added pointedly.
The ones out of place here are you too.
Echoes of agreement resonated from other diners, their stares coldly telling George and his girlfriend to leave. George, trying to defend himself, shot back.
Clearly, these two are the odd ones out.
His girlfriend added.
After all we've done for this place.
Suddenly, a man from another table stood up and shouted at the two.
Enough of this disgraceful behavior.
As George looked up to identify the man, his face turned a shade paler. The man was none other than George's own father, who seemed to have witnessed the entire confrontation. Addressing everyone in the restaurant, George's father apologized.
I deeply regret the behavior of my foolish son. I assure you, I will sternly advise him not to frequent this establishment again. I apologize for this unfortunate incident.
And with that, he deeply bowed in remorse. George, held firmly by the scruff of his neck by his father, was admonished.
Apologize to everyone now.
Chastised, George muttered a nearly inaudible,
I'm sorry.
before shuffling out of the restaurant. As George's girlfriend tried to exit, Alice stood up and confidently said,
I'm incredibly happy with him. Maybe you should find yourself a better boyfriend.
George's girlfriend, her face reddening, hastily left the premises. As I stood there stunned, the restaurant erupted into applause. The elderly couple next to us commented.
That last comment was brilliant. He's a lucky man to have you.
More cheers and applause rang out from the other patrons.
Let's celebrate together.
Someone shouted, treating us to a round of drinks. The entire dining room joined in to celebrate Alice's birthday. The atmosphere became more relaxed and jovial until, suddenly, a collective gasp and exclamations of surprise filled the air as the lights in the restaurant went out, plunging the space into darkness. Moments later, the flickering light of candles began to emerge from the back of the restaurant, gradually getting closer. The birthday cake I had arranged for Alice in advance was being carried out. Spontaneously, the patrons began singing the birthday song. Overwhelmed, Alice beamed with tears in her eyes, deeply moved by the unexpected turn of events. And as Alice blew out the candles, another round of applause filled the room, and the lights came back on. Suddenly, there were gasps and murmurs of surprise throughout the restaurant. There I was, kneeling before Alice, presenting her with an engagement ring. Will you marry me? The entire restaurant went silent, everyone waiting with bated breath for Alice's response.
Yes, of course.
The room erupted into a joyful celebration. We were showered with congratulatory words and well wishes, and some even treated us to more exquisite dishes we hadn't expected. As we were leaving, the chef approached us.
Thank you so much for choosing our restaurant for such a special occasion.
He said, bowing deeply.
I'm truly sorry for any inconvenience earlier.
No need to apologize, I replied. You stood up for us, and because of that, this has become an unforgettable memory. Thank you so much.
No problem at all. Watching your lovely wife-to-be, now your fiancé, enjoy our dishes with such delight was truly heartwarming. My predecessor always told me to ensure that our customers leave with a smile, and that's what I've been striving for ever since. Thanks to you, today, it seems everyone in the restaurant is leaving with joy. There's no greater happiness for me than that.
But that guy, he was a regular, wasn't he?
Alice asked, seeming a bit apologetic.
Well, losing one or two regulars is no big deal. I have no regrets.
The chef replied with a refreshing and honest smile. Other patrons added as we left.
Take care. Let's grab a drink together next time.
On the way home, Alice, beaming with happiness, said,
This turned out to be an unforgettable birthday and engagement anniversary. Thank you so much for this amazing surprise.
Squeezing my hand tightly, as we strolled back home, Alice chuckled.
But proposing in a restaurant, that's quite unconventional, isn't it?
And she laughed softly, clearly amused. Well, I originally thought of just surprising you with the cake and proposing in a calm and private setting. But something sparked in me right here. This moment will stay with us forever, don't you think?
Yes, absolutely. I'll never forget it.
From what I heard later on, George and his father came back to the restaurant to apologize. Apparently, George had been bringing various girlfriends to this restaurant before, and he always acted obnoxiously. His father, hearing the stories from acquaintances, wanted to verify the facts for himself and discreetly visited the restaurant when he knew George would be there. Later, a letter from George arrived at my family's home expressing his apologies and vowing to change his ways. By the way, it seems he and that girlfriend of his broke up shortly after that incident. While forgiving George entirely is difficult, that day led to some cherished memories, and we met some wonderful people at a great establishment. It really strengthened the bond between my wife and me. Ever since then, it's become a tradition for Alice and I to visit that restaurant on her birthday. It renews my energy to work hard throughout the year, just for that one special visit. On her birthday, many of the guests are the same folks from that memorable day. It appears the incident left a lasting impression on the other customers as well. I'm determined to keep working hard so I can take my wife to that restaurant again next year.